Mesdames et messieurs, welcome back for this first panel of the afternoon. The title of this panel is Concrétiser ses projets, quels accompagnements et financements pour l'entrepreneuriat féminin. We have an excellent panel of brilliant individuals from different backgrounds, all leaders in their own right across the MENA region. I'd like to welcome our panelists today. We have Areije Shakar, Director of Fund of Funds in Bahrain. We have Elissa Freiha, Managing Director of Womena, which is a MENA-based media platform focused on female empowerment. We have Leila Akli, CEO of P Relations, a PR and communications platform in Algeria. And last but certainly not least, we have Neveen Tahri, President and founder of Delta Shield for Investment in Egypt, amongst many other hats that she wears. For the next hour, we'll be tackling a few topics. We're going to delve into the misconceptions that many have still about female entrepreneurs in this region that we all sit in. We're going to talk about challenges and opportunities that we see that exist here in this region, the role of education and how it translates into female employment, and finally, the role of various stakeholders, government, corporate, and capital providers that have influence over the funding dynamics in the region when it comes to female entrepreneurship. Before we start, feel free to write in your questions in the chat box, and let's get this started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'd like to take a step back first and kind of take a macro level perspective. The beauty of this panel today really lies in its diversity. Everyone thinks of the MENA region as one market, when really it's not. It's an idiosyncratic region, fragmented in many ways, with very, very different dynamics from Algeria to Bahrain. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask all of you, and we can start with Areije, how you think your respective countries and perhaps even your own organizations or the industries that you work in have changed over the last 10 years with respect to female participation and female leadership. Areije, would you like to kick off the discussion?
Great. Thanks a lot, Sonia. And I'm very excited to be here amongst this very high-profile panel. So I think, from my perspective, I think Bahrain has always been quite pioneering in the region when it comes to women and women in leadership and in various positions. I think there's always been an opportunity. I think what I've seen starting to change over the past 10 years is the cultural mindset around women being in these kind of roles and the pride that comes along with it. And so whereby before it might have been something like, oh, she's leaving her family, oh, she's not choosing that right path to be part of that sort of cultural mindset of what a woman should actually be in as in a position. I think I've started to see how that has played a huge role in empowering women to even feel more at ease to follow their ambitions and actually be able to take these kind of added responsibilities because of the balance that can come between what the society may view as well as the family and friends at home. And I think whether we like it or not, it always plays a big role. So it's nice to see that. And also within the organizations, I think there's become a lot more flexibility about women being able to balance between the various roles that they play, whether they have families like children or taking care of like their parents or elderly. There's always a responsibility that they have outside of their professional lives. And it's nice to see that this is evolving a lot in Bahrain.
Very good. And Elissa, I'll move on to you with the same question. I mean, you've really been at the helm, and I've seen it firsthand over here, of a movement, really. And would love to hear your thoughts on this as well, because this is probably your favorite topic.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely my favorite topic. And I've been talking about it from the rooftops for the better part of the last 10 years. Which is really interesting. I think originally when I really moved to the UAE in 2013 and started Womena, women empowerment wasn't really on the tip of many people's tongues. It wasn't a topic that was really discussed. And the biggest shift that's happened, I think, globally is that now female inclusion and women empowerment is something that we're all aware of. Organizations are aware of. There's been enough, hounding and hassling and propaganda out there to really let people know that they should be including women more, that policies need to be enhanced. And you're seeing a lot of funds, government funds, and a lot of initiatives, especially in our region, go towards female inclusion. And what I found really fascinating is, having grown up in Paris and in France my whole life, before coming to the region, I saw that because the stereotype of the Middle East is that women, are not as empowered as other places in the world, predominantly the West, that we need more empowerment here in the Middle East. And that means that there has been a lot of resources, global resources, Western resources, local resources put towards including women here. So that's actually had an amazing effect in our region, and we're seeing the results of that. But I think what's interesting is comparing that to the dialogue that happens in the West, where they, up until very recently, feminism was a thing that was already tackled about 40 years ago and is not something that needed to be focused on. So you don't have as many resources really being allocated in the West towards female inclusion. And that's one of the biggest shifts I've seen.
So that's kind of like the GCC angle. If we move on to kind of North Africa, Neveen, and I know, Elissa, you've done work in Cairo as well, but Neveen, in Egypt, you've held multiple and still hold multiple board roles. Maybe you can provide that perspective, sitting on the board of many Egyptian companies, how you've seen the scene evolve sitting in Cairo.
Well, I think that's primarily I want to thank everybody being here. It's just great. And Sonia, thank you for this. I think one of the things that I've seen tremendously over the past 20 years is how entrepreneurship has come to play. I think when I first started my first company, I just jumped out and so that was about 25 years ago. And I didn't even know the word entrepreneurship. And all of a sudden it's just that as a woman, you're there. And so being so early on, I was asked to sit on many boards that are thinking of playing a role in investment because I knew that part of it. So I sat on boards very early on. And I think not just on company boards, but being on the stock exchange board as the first woman, it became like a theme of being the first woman to sit anywhere, but never the last woman. And that to me is really what is really changed, because you came in as the first woman, but then you were actually compensated by having more women come in. And the encouragement that you do to accommodate more women and complement what we're doing is what I've really seen as a change. And it's not just on the boards, but also starting something and knowing that there are many others that are there now. And I'm lucky because being such an early beginner in most of the fields, I see many women come along and how that has grown and become something as opposed to just being an employee somewhere. You can still be employed, but you wouldn't mind being employed by another startup. And that to me is the real change that I have seen in Egypt in general, and actually around the region. Sitting on many, the Cartier Initiative, MIT, Pan-Arab, all these things, I've seen what these women along the region have really, really done. And they are achievers. They are so persistent on achieving what they have started and making sure that they leave an impact, which is something that I've really bewildered by and until today.
Amazing. And Leila, I'm going to ask you the same question, but I'm also going to move into kind of the next question that I had, which is somewhat related around misconceptions. You and I had a very interesting conversation the other day around the misconceptions that people have about women in Algeria, for example. Can you share some of what you shared with me on the phone, and then also what your thoughts are in terms of the evolution of female leadership in Algeria as a market?
Alors, en Algérie, c'est un peu particulier parce que les générations passées étaient beaucoup plus féministes et beaucoup plus engagées que les nouvelles générations. Il faut savoir qu'en Algérie, on a des lois très avant-gardistes en termes d'égalité. Les genres, on a pu voter dans les années 60.
So in Algeria, it's actually very different. So we had a very big avant-garde when it comes to gender equality in the 60s. And we actually thought that when it comes to protection, to gender equality, we didn't have the same issues. We don't have a salary gap between men and women. So I think we are very different issues. For us, it's more like a cultural issue. So we still perceived as half man. So we're not like a full person. So that's how we perceived. So today, you have to basically face up to the challenge that sometimes, you are asked to come with your husband or your tutor, if you want a bank credit. And we also have quotas in Algeria for politics. So there's a lot that has been done for gender equality. However, the interpretation is actually different, and how concretely they applied, it is also different. And that's the problem we're facing. So as for solutions, as a civil society, we try to think how we can change. We talked about financing. We created a club of business angels, and we're going to finance other projects by women, as it's difficult here for women to get this financing. So that's why, to promote women in business, we created this fund to show that women also succeed in business. So women are very entrepreneurial, and in university here, women represent 75% of students. However, here in the job market, they represent 35% of the workforce. And very often these figures, are not representative of reality. You have a lot of women just working home, helping the family, caring for the elders. So I would say that then they're not covered, they're not registered, and this is going to be like tiny micro businesses that they have.
As a French woman, about even French Algerian women, right? So I'd love to talk about this idea of misconceptions, because I'm sure that the audience is probably mixed. There are people who are sitting in our region, there's people sitting in France and beyond. So I'd like to ask, so Leila just talked about the misconceptions about Algerian women and Algerian law, even when it comes to females. I'd like to extend that beyond the Algerian border to your market, whether it be Egypt, whether it be the UAE or Bahrain. What are some of the misconceptions that you feel exist about female entrepreneurship coming from people outside the region? Elissa, I think you would probably have some data points on this even.
So I do, but as a policy, I don't like to focus on the negative. So even at Womena, in the way that we do, we don't like highlighting the problems. We prefer to focus on solution and solution-oriented storytelling. So I think the misconceptions are pretty clear, and I don't necessarily want to reiterate them. I would just rather shatter them by giving other factual data, so that the fact that women do receive less funding, that's a misconception. I mean, that's a result of negative misconceptions. Yeah. But what comes from that is that women then have to get really scrappy. They have to get very strategic about how they spend their money. And so actually female-led businesses end up producing twice as much ROI with half of the capital allocated. Female-led businesses also produce 30% more jobs in the region, which is a really exciting statistic. So your dollars or your currency basically goes much further with female-led businesses. And teams in general tend to be more diverse with a female founder. So they'll hire more women. They'll hire more diverse socioeconomic levels and ethnic groups. So it's everybody really wins when you're investing in female-led businesses. And it's not because women are magically, business inclined or better in any way. It's just because we've had to overcome so many struggles that we're kind of much fairer and more open when we're hiring, when we're thinking about problem solving. And I think that that's a better way that I choose to look at it, right? Is that female, when you talk to investors, when we work with male investors, and we present them women-focused companies, we don't pitch it as a feel-good, you need to invest in women, therefore here are women invest in. We pitch it as a numbers game. And the numbers work in your favor as an investor if you invest in women-led businesses.
I like that. I like that a lot, the fact that you interpreted my question in that way. And I think, Areije, you can step in as well. I mean, I'm slightly biased because my family's lived in Bahrain for quite a long time. But I would love for you to jump in as well from the Bahraini perspective. Bahrain may be small, but it's feisty and has always put women at the forefront. So I would love for you to jump in here as well.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sonia. I think, a lot of what Leila said resonated with me because I think a lot of the time there's this, misconception about, Bahrain or across the GCC that, women are strapped and not given the opportunity. But if I speak just from Bahrain, they've always been given the opportunity. I think sometimes we always joke around with the men because sometimes we get even extra opportunities. So there's grants and support, even from the debt side, also from, the equity side, that programs just focused on women and to help support them, whether, through entrepreneurship and being able to, start their businesses. Even that, the note on, DNA. So Bahrain has always been a center of trade. And, in history, a lot of entrepreneurs have come out of here. And so it really is a question of, of a decision and a choice for each of our women. And it's the cultural barriers, I think, in the past that would stop them. What if they were to fail? Or this thought of like, what if I were to start my own business? It's, this notion of like, no, women shouldn't have to go and work. They need to be home and take care of their families, or the prestige that comes along with not having to work. And now the mindset I've seen has changed because it's not about, the prestige or not having to work, etc., from a cultural perspective, but actually, women want to pursue their ambitions. They have a lot to offer in various different industries and sectors, and they want to give, and they're all very educated. Bahrain was one of the first countries in the GCC that, offered education to women. So we have a very educated, female population, and, a lot of it needs to go. So they actually, you see, they've empowered, women. I'm a family of 3 girls. I'm the eldest of 3, females. And never once was I ever treated like I, wasn't able to do something because I was a female. And I never even knew the difference. And I'm not going to say that it's just my father or my mother that brought me up this way, but I think it's across the board that, a lot of females feel like they need to offer and they need to be able to provide some source of, and contribute to the overall, the society as well. And so, yes, there is this, I guess, a misconception that you feel that, women have these limitations. But I think now it's across the board through government initiatives. And now that the mindset has changed, it's now become a lot more accepting. And so it just makes women feel, I think it's the best time for women to start their businesses because they no longer have to feel shame about it. I think we've paved the way for a lot of the new generation to be able to just really be open to what they want to do. And exactly what Neveen was also saying, and also Elissa was saying, that I think there's a lot of hard work that has been done across the Arab world that now the generation that are all like, coming into the workforce have a much easier time doing what they want to do.
Absolutely. If I can just jump in really quickly, I think Bahrain historically also has like an incredibly strong female population and a great governmental cultural narrative around empowering women. It's especially the GCC, and I won't speak for North Africa, but I know that in the GCC you need a top-down approach as well as a grassroots kind of movement that's more natural through education and generational change. But for us, we need governments to really step in and either place quotas or incentivize the population to either educate women, allow women to be entrepreneurs, let them know that it's still an honorable career path if they go into the private sector and they don't just go into a government job. And Bahrain is actually a really good example of seeing that in effect, I think.
100%
and
agree.
if I may add, actually, Bahrain is also 100% educated. And I think it brings us to the education side. I think we see that, and we see that probably in Tunisia too. Because education, if I know exactly, if I'm very well educated, then I actually know what my rights, I know what I can do. Like Areije, we're 3 girls and I'm the eldest of the 3. And so I think that culture of being brought up without knowing the differentiation between I'm a man or a woman, there's no gender bias. And I think this is one of the things that any entrepreneur that comes along, I look at it as though it's a gender thing. It's absolutely not. On the contrary, it's merit-based. It's the hard work that you put. And I think I absolutely agree with you, Elissa, that it's a numbers game. What is it that I'm going to do? But there is also that added addition that I'm also a woman, and women are better to deal with money. They are much more clever in how they spend and how they achieve. But I think the one thing that still, I mean, I'll talk about Egypt, is still perception is, well, if I hire the woman, she's gonna get married, she will have kids, she will take the break. And they don't realize that in itself is the rounded characters that you bring up, because they can do both. They're multitaskers. Women are multitask, but there's still that cultural barrier of if I hire the woman, I'm giving up a couple of things that are there. Hence comes that differentiation. And I'm not sure that this has gone away. It still is in the back of the mind at all times. And hence women tend to hire women much more because they can understand what goes there. Oh, that's actually what I see and I feel. As senior as you get, you still get that back in the back of their minds.
Yeah, and you brought a valid point, which was a perfect segue into the next section around education. I think what's interesting about the region that we sit in also is that many of the countries that we are in have comparable, if not higher, female participation in the STEM space, for example, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, right? So what do you think are the key challenges that you see? Sorry, Elissa, you can twist my question to make it more positive, but what are some of the key challenges or opportunities, Elissa, that you see despite a formidable talent pool that doesn't translate in seeing more women in STEM going on to become female entrepreneurs? And Neveen, maybe you can chip in, because I know that you sit on the advisory board of AUC, American University of Cairo, and your involvement with HBS, Harvard Business School, MENA, Research Center. Elissa, of course, always welcome to jump in. Leila from Algeria, and Areije as well. So I'll invite any of you guys to jump in with your thoughts on the educational front.
I would say even it's the culture, right? So I can't twist that question, unfortunately. I can't twist it to be a positive answer. But the biggest issues when it comes to jumping into the private sector, first of all, education is really, entrepreneurship is very difficult in and of itself, regardless of gender. Once you add gendered elements in there and these subconscious biases that are held by investors trying to fundraise, that makes it even more difficult. Beyond that, you are talking about a region where there are very few places where a single market is good enough. So if you're an entrepreneur in the UAE, you have to also be an entrepreneur in Egypt, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Saudi Arabia. You have to find your talent pool across these borders, and there aren't necessarily elements that are freely flowing between them to make that an easy process. So entrepreneurship is really difficult. And once you add, as Neveen said, the expectation of women to get married, because that's pretty much like our biggest achievement since birth, is considered like our marriage. No matter how many like awards you get or how many prestigious things you've been to or whatever you've achieved, you should get married is the assumption. And I think that there's just a lot of struggle that comes to it. So again, I expected to have kids. If you choose to have kids, you won't be able to fundraise. It'll be very, very difficult to do so. Investors aren't really that active in the region. So we're really competing against all male teams, doubly as difficult as any other developed, more developed economy in the world. So there's a lot of different things that kind of come into play. And I think the last thing would be the money aspect of paying salaries. It's really difficult to compete with really expensive, great salaries that governments give for public sector jobs. If you want talent in the region to go into entrepreneurship and tech entrepreneurship, they need to either take a pay cut or no salary for a really long time. And that's not something a lot of people are willing to do. I'm talking about the GCC specifically. Very few locals in the GCC are willing to actually give up a huge paycheck and a cushy job for the struggle. It's a cost benefit analysis that's really difficult.
Areije, you want to jump in, or?
I say that obviously I agree with everything that Elissa was just saying, and I think I would like to have this magic wand to be able to kind of remove this cultural stigma around the accomplishment around family and things like that. But I think if we were to perhaps start to evolve, then maybe you'd see more women taking their education and starting their own businesses and going down that entrepreneurship route. But right now, I find it very, mind-boggling to see that a man would perhaps take on that role for the woman as she starts to kind of, bootstrap her business and let it launch off from a cultural perspective. But I think, sometimes she has to make a choice. And I think that's where there's, a difficulty. And maybe that's where, women are better at, being able to do more than one thing at the same time. But that's a lot of times, sometimes women are going to probably have to choose whether they decide to have children or be able to kind of go into that entrepreneurship, route, because they will have to be balancing between two very, it's a job, right? Taking care of the family in any way is a job. And unless they're able to have help to support them, then, their ambitions could be delayed or trapped from a cultural perspective. I think, one thing that perhaps we could work on collectively is to tell women that it's okay that if they choose not to get married at 20 or 25 and do that and then start their business, then be able to take a break, or vice versa, that, marriage and family isn't the be all and end all. And if a woman wants to be able to start a business, then that it's okay. If you think about it, also a lot of, women that go into harder, professions that medicine, etc. They sometimes decide not to go in, anything that requires maybe 10 years of education or 15 years of education, because they might get, because they want to have a family, etc. And how to balance between those two things. And I think it's a hard choice for a woman to make, especially from a cultural perspective, if there's nowhere for them to be able to kind of have a mentor, to get mentored, to be able to make a decision that's comfortable for them and to be okay with that. And I think, between us on the panel, I think there's various routes that we probably and roles that we play to help support women that are stuck trying to make these kind of decisions.
Mm-hmm. But if I may, if Leila wants to say something first, but I would like to say that one of the challenges I'm seeing is actually that men tend to shy away from women that have characters like ours. And it's probably one of the things that I'm seeing in the younger generation that are choosing between, exactly as you were saying, Areije, between which they should go. Should we get married or should we actually look at the career? And it's one of the things that I think it's a big challenge that is unaddressed. It's not being addressed at all. But it is something that, the Middle Eastern man is really, will continue to be that level of thinking that he is a much better or twice more important than the woman. Maybe we don't see it when we're in France or we're in Europe, and yet locally and in the region, I think one of the things that I used to do is at home, this is his Sayyid, he's the guy, you are my boss. But then I'm at home, somebody totally different than where I am. So you need to have this double character sort of way so that you can actually move into your career. And the younger generation don't have that. And I honestly, we're all from the younger generation. And I have to say, we're not being brought up this way. We're being brought up as achievers. We're doing this and that. So I think it does need some acceptance from the man to accept that they have successful women. And women that are of character, because most women that actually achieve and become really, they end up either being divorced or they remarry somebody that is this, and that's what I'm seeing in the region. And so I think this is a big challenge, and I see a lot of women that are choosing not to get married because they really don't want to get married, and it's a choice they make. But then comes all the cultural stuff around having this balanced life, where you can't have it in our region because of the concept, so because of our cultures, and because we're not allowed to have a boyfriend, or we're not allowed to do this, or not allowed to do that, which I think is a real challenge. That it's like being in a crossroad where it's happening, where women are achieving. Hence, women should be supporting each other, and good men, and there are many of these that support you and back you as we go. If it's not our fathers, it's somebody that within the institutions we work on who push you to deliver.
A very good point. Leila, would you like to jump in from the kind of Algerian perspective? Is this resonating? Is it a different kind of situation?
C'est exactement la même chose. On fait face exactement aux mêmes problématiques culturelles dans mon pays. C'est exactement la même chose. Pour la plupart des jeunes filles, il y a encore 5-6 ans, elles ne pouvaient pas être épouse, maman et chef d'entreprise, dans leur tête en tout cas.
Yes, it's our problem as well. We have the same cultural problem in our country. Most young girls, until age 26, they could not be mum and the company director. It wasn't possible. We couldn't be both. Today, we are in a different world. I'm going to tell you something that might shock you, but there are a new category of influencers who are 25, who are married, who have children, and who are company directors. This has changed the perception of the young women. They have 4 or 5 million followers, similar to them, and they have changed the idea totally that women couldn't be company directors, couldn't be an influencer, couldn't have children all at the same time. And today, when we go to universities, we talk about female entrepreneurship, and we hear that a woman has ideas to create a company, and in 6 years, the mentality has greatly changed a lot. And in Algeria, we encourage entrepreneurship at regional level as well. The organization has worked in universities in the country and has really encouraged them to see life differently and to create their own company. It's amazing that in just a few years, lots of women have changed their way of thinking, and I'm really happy about that, because it was really painful to hear in universities that women were saying, "Oh, I prefer to get married. I think it's more important to have a family, to have a husband, and to give up your career." Whereas in 6 years, the dreams of young women have really changed. They're asking me, how do you become an entrepreneur? How is your life? How do you launch your ideas, and etc., and so on and so on, so on and so forth. So the civil society is changing now. There are some associations that are created, are very visible for the new generation, and within a few years, there's been a change of way of thinking. But of course, it is complicated. In Algeria, we have the COVID, and the children go to school. 1 day out of 2, school finishes at 2:30 p.m. So you can imagine how mothers can manage that. The nursery is shut at 5 o'clock, so it's very difficult to manage family life and professional life. there's lots of things to organize, and families who help one another looking after the children, and it's a big problem in Algeria. We have to find solutions to look after children. Should be helped and find ways to keep children busy at least till 5 o'clock. Or just find nursery systems. We have encouraged this idea. We thought it would be good to finance projects financed by women for women in nurseries, in clubs and other places to enable children to do something with their time rather than staying home doing nothing. So we are working on this now. We have the same problem as so many women in the region. There should be welcoming structures which enable women to carry on working, and the Algerian woman is a very, she likes to fight. There's been the Algerian war, there has been terrorism, there's been political changes as well. We have really been fighting, and we will carry on fighting. Talk about startups a lot, and there's a new fund which has been created. We're talking about startups today as in, being led by men, but I think it's very important that women do startups as well, not just in Algeria, but all over the world. Elissa, I think.
We have little time left, only the funding part, because that's also very important. We alluded to it earlier as well. The fact is only about 10% of seed funding capital, so early stage capital in emerging markets, goes towards women. It's not to say that it's much better in the West, by the way. So let's not think that there's a massive gap between what's happening in the West and what's happening where we're sitting, because there's not that much of a big difference. But I'd like to, and again, Elissa, you can interpret this in the way that you would like. I would like to talk about kind of the funding gaps that you're seeing, or funding opportunities that you're seeing in your own context. Elissa, maybe you can start, because you've done a lot around this. When you started with Womena, initially it was very much set up as an investment platform before it morphed into what it is today. You were there for a reason. You found a gap in the market. You saw that there was no platform that was there really that was made up of females for females. So maybe you can start off this discussion on the funding dynamic in this region.
Yeah, absolutely. So exactly. So from 2013 to 2018, Womena was a angel investment platform, very similar to Leila's project. And we empowered female investors to invest in businesses point blank, right? So startups, not with a gender lens. So we just made our own bet that women were going to invest with a more egalitarian, diverse eye. So we didn't just source female-led businesses, and we ended up with a portfolio of about 50-50. It's definitely a massive issue, because within the region, for angel investors who, first of all, who are the first step, right, of funding beyond bootstrapping for founders, for them to start growing, for those numbers to grow, for the comfort levels to grow and the confidence of an investor to grow, you need success stories. And the problem with the region is that after Series B funding, there aren't real players in the pipeline. So most of our VCs that come after angels will come in for a maybe pre-Series A, Series A, Series B, and they'll come in at these early $1 million, $2 million rounds. But once we get into $15 million rounds, we don't have anyone who comes in. So angels are kind of left holding equity for businesses for a ridiculous amount of time and never seeing an exit. So that one leaves most founders to flounder and to have to search for funding outside of the region. So you're getting more and more founders trying to go to places like France or places like the UK or places like Belgium to get funding for their businesses in the Middle East. And the opportunity is so incredible to invest in our region. So much can grow. Just basic tech infrastructure and Internet of Things is just ripe for development. But we don't really have the pipeline in place. We don't have a Silicon Valley and that liquidity that's just constantly churning. So we're stuck. And one of the reasons Womena changed perspectives was we actually saw that we could have a bigger impact on the region by shifting the perceptions of women in the region and the perceptions of women entrepreneurs rather than trying to convince investors to invest, because that was just such a it's the problem is not with convincing angels to invest. The problem lies within the bigger players that have to start having some confidence in our region and putting money in our region.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think I guess I can step in just with my own comment on this front, because I run a VC in this region and half of our partners are female. And I think that does translate into the investments. We just launched, an impact investment fund last year. 45% of the companies we invested into are female led. And it wasn't like we need to invest more in females. There was no kind of, thesis around that. It just happened that the best companies that we found and we invest globally happen to be female led. For a reason, back to what Neveen was saying earlier. Areije, what's interesting about you sitting on this panel is that you are a capital provider to the capital providers. So you're an LP into a lot of the regional funds in the region, right? So do you feel like there's a responsibility from the LPs for this to trickle down the regional VCs and almost have some sort of quota mechanism or something in order to make sure that there's more capital injection going towards females?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think we're a completely female team, and it just happened by mistake. It wasn't on purpose. And we run the fund of funds, and we've started to see, I think, sometimes, there's definitely, a role that we can play, especially as we choose the funds that we invest in and see how they treat, the gender lens when it comes to their investment. I think another thing that, perhaps we don't see women, the funding in women-led startups in this space is the fact that sometimes I feel women, are probably afraid to raise money unless they are 100% sure that something's going to work, to go out and take investors' money. It's the conviction. And I think it's also the way that women are when, they want to ask for a raise or a promotion. We always second guess ourselves. And, I'd like to, perhaps I'm being stereotypical or generalizing, but you see that a lot of times, men are far more confident in being able to pitch for something, even though they might know 100% that it's going to work, as opposed to a woman who requires a lot more conviction to be sure that her business will actually, reach a certain level before taking other people's money. So there's a responsibility that comes around that. And I think
valuations. Women tend to negotiate down their valuations also.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. So then, a male-led, business all of a sudden becomes more lucrative because, they'll, give out like wild valuations as opposed to a woman who's, a lot more kind of realistic. And so it's, I guess, I don't know what's the right or wrong way, but I think we need to also be able to understand that. And I guess in my role, it's the responsibility to see that the fund managers that we choose actually, realize that, we're investing in business based on merit, and whether it's female-led or a male-led, that, they're reviewed equally.
All right. Thank you for that. Last word, since we're running out of time. I'd like the North African perspective on this front as well. Neveen and Leila, you're both involved also with investments on various fronts, whether it be on the angel front or more institutional front. Would you both like to chime in?
I think it's, Areije just said exactly what I think is basically women tend to not want to overvalue or ask for money. So they're very much more conservative. And as Elissa said, what happens is that we have this angel investing, and then you have that missing gap where nobody comes in to take you to the next step. So we have a lot of, what I'm seeing, and I chose not to go into technology, and I'm investing in everything other than technology, because you want to see women with all their creativities come to light. And it's been an unbelievable journey, although it's not a women-focused fund that I'm managing. But what happens is I have 80% of my companies are women. Because I'm a woman, they've just come up and it has become really something that either founders themselves, or they are led in terms of business itself. So anyway, I think there's a lot that's happening, and we encourage women to jump in, and we're there to support in every way, because the maturity of the market is happening. And I think that is where our role comes in, because as starters and people who have initiated a lot of things, make sure that the market goes there.
Awesome. Leila, final words of wisdom. Pas de pression.
Pas de pression. Moi, j'ai la conviction profonde que dans notre région, les femmes sont un acteur très important pour le développement, et que de toute façon, ils ne peuvent pas faire sans nous. Donc, ils sont obligés de compter avec nous.
I would say, and I am actually convinced, that for our area, I think women are very important for development. And let's make it very clear, they can't make it without us. They need to trust us. They need us. And if we're not given the tools to grow, well, we'll create our own tools, and that's what we are doing. And all my co-panelists here are proof of that. We can build our skills, create our companies to help other women. We are here and here to stay. There's no choice for men, I'm sorry. And if you don't help us, then we will help each other, so that in the years to come, we will be a strong stakeholder. And we have an expression saying that to clap your hands, you need two hands. And here, really, to have this opportunity for countries to develop, you will need to also rely on women, not only on men. And this is why we need to continue. We need both. We need men and women. I am not a feminist in the sense that I don't think women are better, but I do believe that we need men and women to build a prosperous society. You can't just rely on half the population. So we need to help each other in order to promote our own space in society. I don't want to be treated like a man. I just want to be treated like a woman, with my strength, with my intelligence. And that's the way it is. So if we are given the opportunity, I think we will do great things. And very often, I think this has been proven in the past, that we can do great things. And why not in business? Thank you very much, Leila, Neveen,